So we're going to attempt to do this without a mic, but at any point you can't hear us, just say something and then we might have to mic up if that's an expression or not. Okay, so hi.
Hi.
We're here to celebrate you. Rachel and I are really good friends, and this is the first event that we are doing together.
Yes,
so it's very special. I'm really glad you all are here for this momentous occasion.
Yes. And I think it's a good sign that I've literally already started crying. So I feel really good about the event so far.
Yay. Okay, well let's just do this. Let's dive in. So your wonderful book is out. It's sweeping, romantic, it's lush, all of my favorite things. And I want to know, what was the first spark, the first moment that you knew what the story was?
It took me a long time to figure out what I wanted to write for my second book. And I was really struggling to come up with an idea, and it was during the pandemic. And my first pandemic hobby was a board game called Wingspan. And yes, so this board game became like my entire personality for about 2 months. It was like all I did. And the whole point of this game is to like attract birds to your aviary. So I am like going hard into birds, you guys. Like I was like, these are magical creatures. And so I was playing with my husband one night. I was like, what if a bird could carry magic? And he says, what if a bird could carry a curse? And I was like, yes.
Oh my gosh.
And thank you, honey.
I don't think I knew that.
Yes. And so it was amazing because I emailed my publisher and I was like, I've got it. Cursed bird in the Pacific Northwest. And she was like, yes.
Yeah.
And somehow she let me write that book. And that was the spark that started the whole thing.
Wow. So you didn't set out to say, I wanted to write, because nature is very woodsy, also set in the Pacific Northwest. You weren't like, I specifically want to set another book in the Pacific Northwest. You went with the idea.
So for me, like, I am not someone who has like a ton of ideas. I have one idea that I focus on, but I do have a list of things that excite me that I'd love to write into a book one day. And so setting a book in the Pacific Northwest was definitely something I wanted to do someday. And it was on my list of things that I would love to put into a book. And so when I thought about writing about a cursed bird, I thought that the Pacific Northwest setting would be perfect for that. And again, because I was writing this book during a very uncertain time, I wanted to set it in a place that felt really comforting to me, and a place that was joyous for me to spend time. And so that for me is the Pacific Northwest.
We can't get into this story, but I once went walking in the woods with Rachel and we got horribly lost. And the evening was descending, and I did not think that we would make it out alive, but you were really at home.
I think it's funny, right? Because you know, all of our different perceptions of things. So Isabel's like, we're about to die.
Yes.
And I'm like, how peaceful, so serene.
Yes. I'm like, there's going to be a cougar who's going to come along our path, but you were like, well, I know what to do in that situation.
Like, I live in the Pacific Northwest. You've got to look it up. Like, you know, I probably have an overconfidence. I'm like, animals can sense I'm good and I love them. Like, the cougar's not going to do anything. It's probably not true.
Okay, so one of the things that I love about this book is that setting is its own type of character. It feels like, I don't know, that it's going to start speaking back to you. It has its own kind of personality. I'd love to know what inspired that setting specifically, especially with the bird angle.
Yeah, so I have this like list of things that I'd love to write about.
Yeah.
Pacific Northwest being one of them. A couple of years ago, I had visited this wildlife refuge in the Pacific Northwest. It's up in Anacortes, and it's called Predators of the Heart. And they started by housing wolves that were unable to survive in the wild. And now they take in all sorts of wildlife that for one reason or another cannot survive. And they raise a lot of awareness about sharing our habitat with these creatures. And so I was just so moved by the experience. You know, you got to like walk through acres with these wolves, and it was just this really incredible experience of such like magnificent animals that we are lucky enough to share this home with. And
Do
so
you have a picture with the wolf? Have I
yes,
seen
yes,
the picture?
yeah.
Oh, now everything is clicking.
Yeah,
I
it's
understand.
all-
Yeah,
yes.
it's all falling into place. Okay.
And so this was a couple of years ago, but I was just like, what an incredible setting for a book. And because it was in the Pacific Northwest and because I had this bird element, I thought, what if our main character works at a wildlife refuge and runs it with her mother? And
That's
then,
really cool.
from that stems, well, then maybe the magic system is connected to animals. And she's able to have, some sort of connection to these creatures and calm them or feel what they're feeling, have this like very deep empathy for them. And the whole thing just started coming from that.
Wow. I think that's really cool that you visited that place and volunteered there and went there and got to know. I mean, I've always wanted to have a pet owl. I know that probably that's not a good thing, but every time you post a picture of these owls, it's beautiful.
Yeah, they're just like magnificent creatures. And what's cool about the northern spotted owl, which is the owl in the book, is that it is native to the Pacific Northwest and it is a threatened species. And they were actually like embroiled in conflict, like this wild owl in the 90s because of the logging industry in the Pacific Northwest. And the reason these owls became a threatened species is because of deforestation, particularly with old growth forests, which is where these owls live. Wow. And so like we literally had bumper stickers in Washington that was like, save a logger, kill an owl. Like it was like this actual controversy in the 90s. And so that's why I chose this owl, because it is a big part of the history of the Pacific Northwest.
Okay, well, I love that. That's amazing. And so, okay, I'm sensing a theme here with both of your books. Both of your main characters are witches. And are you obsessed with witches as you are with Damon from the Vampire Diaries? I just need to know the level of obsession here.
He's just like always. It all comes back to Damon. Always. Yes. There is no other team. If you believe otherwise, the door is right back there. No, I love witches. I'm obsessed with witches, but in this way of like this idea that, so the nature of witches did not start out as a witch book. It started out as like a book with seasonaries where people like had kind of a glorified connection to the seasons and the weather. And someone read this book for me and was like, so they're glorified weathermen. And I was like, no, they're not. And then I read it again and I was like, oh my God, I wrote a book about glorified weathermen. And so I was like, I need to redo this. And so that's when I restructured the whole book. I rewrote it and I tied the magic system to the seasons. Okay. And so when I was thinking about what kind of people would wield this magic, what kind of people would have some kind of connection or power over the elements, and the seasons and the weather, I thought instantly of witches, because I've always thought of witches as people who have this like very deep connection to their environment and to the natural world around them. And so they kind of became like the natural wielders of power in this world. And I feel like as soon as I made that switch, something inside me as a storyteller just clicked. And I was like, this is my place. Like nature and magic, like this is what I want to put into the world. And I feel like it is not a coincidence that once that clicked for me, that's the book that got published, because it was not the first book that I wrote.
It does feel very much like a Rachel book. I think I can identify your stories because they have those elements, because they feel very earthy, very natural. And I love that, because as a reader and a fan and a friend of yours, I love that I know that I can pick up one of your books and enter a story that way and know the kind of world that I'm stepping into.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think it's really awesome. So this is the second book, and I don't know if anyone is aware, but there is this lore about writing a second book and how awful it is. And it's a terrible, horrifying process. You know, I may have heard one or two things about it. So I'd love to know, what was the process like now that you had the success with nature, then you're sitting down to write your second book. What was it like?
It was awful.
Okay. So we are sorry. Yep. Okay, proving
So-
that lore.
It's funny because I'm very much someone, I'm like, knowledge is power.
Yeah.
My friends have told me this is going to be tough, so it won't be tough for me because I know what to expect. It's not true. It was very, very tough for me. I think because so when you, before you ever sell a book, you have as much time as you want to work on this book. I had worked on Nature for years before it was picked up by an agent and then went on to be picked up by a publisher. And then all of a sudden, book 2 is here.
Yeah.
Under contract.
Yeah.
I don't have an idea. And my publisher's like, what's next? And I'm like, I don't know. You tell me. That is not how it works, apparently.
No.
I have to tell her what comes next. And the pressure of writing under such a short timeline, when I had been used to having years, I didn't think I could do it. That's just what it came down to.
How long did you have to write it?
I wrote the first draft of this in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. And then and then it went through multiple rounds of revision, of course. But to wrap my head around a timeline like that was impossible for me when I was in it. And I questioned every part of my talent, my skill, if I am a good enough storyteller to pull this off. And that's not even the right way of saying it, because sometimes a story just needs to steep and it needs time.
I totally agree with you.
Without that time, I just didn't know what I'd be able to put out into the world. And I had called my publisher or my editor crying, being like, I don't think I can do it. And she was like, well, hey, what about this book? Are you not sold on? What do you want to change? And I was like, well, nothing. And she's like, well, what's your vision for it that you need more time for? And I was like, well, I don't have anything specifically. Yeah. I just think I need more time. And that apparently is not compelling. A compelling enough reason to give me more time. And so we ended up moving forward with the book. And I think, are there any creatives in the audience, any writers? I think what's really cool about this process for me was that we put so much emphasis on inspiration and on this idea that we are going to sit at our computers and the words are going to flow and we are going to lose track of time and hours will pass and thousands of words will be written. And those days are amazing when they happen, but they feel like magic. And the reason they feel like magic is because they're not the norm. At least they're not for me. Books can be written on days where it feels magical, where the words are flowing, where you are so in love with the story, you don't think you will ever be able to write something ever again that you love as much. And books are also written on days when it feels absolutely impossible. And this book was written mainly on days when it felt impossible. And the really cool thing is that now I'm, months out from having been working on it. And I love this book and I am so proud of it. And it was written on days where it felt absolutely off.
I love that you said that too, because for me, there's a lot of pressure in having, okay, I have this amount of time to be creative. So I have to sit down and be like, okay, ideas come to me. I have to be creative for the next 2 hours. It doesn't work that way. And I think that's really, really encouraging. And also in reading this book, it feels and reads effortless. So I think there's something also about trusting yourself and your talent and your work ethic, because I think all of it together produced this.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this book was such an incredible lesson in trusting myself and trusting the process and trusting that I know what I love and the stories I want to tell, even on the days where I don't think I know what I love or the stories I want to tell.
Yeah, I think that's incredible. Okay, so so this was a little bit of a trying season. So when you submitted this manuscript and you were talking with your editor about the title, I think that this is really fascinating. Maybe you guys won't think this is fascinating. Please humor me. So it's now time to come up with a title. I would love to talk about that a little bit, because it's actually something that I've never experienced as an author with the titling process of this book specifically.
Yeah. So, sometimes with The Nature of Witches, when I sold it, we had a title, and it did not, that title didn't stay. Actually, it was submitted under "With Lightning in Our Hands," which I was like, so beautiful, so literary. And they're like, that doesn't mean anything. And I'm like, but it's a line in the book. No, it doesn't mean anything. And
I
so
think it's beautiful.
thank you very much. I really love that title. But anyway, but with this book, I did not have a working title. Well, it was affectionately called Bird Book, which also apparently is not a good title.
I think arguments could be made in its favor.
So I was literally like sending emails to my editor, like Bird Book V1, Bird Book V2. But anyway, when it came time to pick a title, Sourcebooks is really like data driven. And so they title test. And so what they do is we like brainstorm a bunch of titles, and then we come up with a concise list of titles that we're all happy with. And then they basically make them as ads. Like they give them a fake cover and a fake name, and then they see what gets the most engagement. And that doesn't always, it's not that we don't pick the title based on that, but it's just a marker of like information that we have on what is getting people excited and what isn't. And so we did that with this book, but like far and away the winner was Wild as the Witch. And so that's how this title came to be.
I think that's so fascinating, because this is not only a creativity, this is not just art, it's also
It's a business.
It's business.
Yeah.
It is an actual business.
Yes.
I think that's really fascinating. So did the cover go through the same kind of rigorous? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So they also test their covers. And
Did you give them ideas for this or no?
They let me be involved, like pretty involved in the process. And that's like varies by publisher. Some publishers will be like, hi, here's your cover, and send you the final. Other publishers will like let you in on the process and update you as the cover design process keeps moving. And Sourcebooks really like keeps me in the loop. And so, yes, I had a lot of say. And this cover was my favorite, and it went through title testing, cover testing, and it was other people's favorite. And so that's how we ended up with this. What they do underneath, though, this has always been a surprise. Cool. Like they did this for Nature. They obviously did this for Wild as well. And that was a surprise. That just landed in my inbox one day, and I literally screamed. I was like, oh my gosh.
Hey, look how beautiful. Can y'all look at this? This is beautiful. And they did this for Nature as well.
Yeah.
They did this for Nature.
Yep.
I love it. I think that the branding, the whole packaging, I think they were really smart and strategic.
Yeah.
Especially with your first book.
Yeah. I mean, I've been spoiled with covers. I really do feel like I have been.
I love it. So I know that there's a very special story with the naming of these characters, and I would love for you to share it, especially with Pike's name.
Yeah,
because I think it's awesome.
Pike's name comes up in reviews a lot, which I was surprised. I get tagged in reviews a lot, like, what's with the name Pike? And anyway, so Pike had this whole, in my head, it didn't make it into the book, but this whole backstory that his parents met at Pike Place Market, which is, a market in Seattle that's like a landmark of that area of the world. And Pike also means fish, but it is also a kind of fish. But anyway, when I was thinking about this book, I wanted every single thing in this book to remind you of the setting you were in. And that meant constantly calling back to the Pacific Northwest and to Seattle. So Pike, obviously his first name, Pike Place Market. His last name is Alder. That's a kind of tree. Iris, obviously, is a flower. And then gray, because the Pacific Northwest is known to be gray. And every single part of this book, I wanted it to be a sensory reading experience. I never wanted the reader for a single moment to forget that you were in the Pacific Northwest. And so giving characters names that called back to the setting was a way of doing that.
I think that's truly, it's so intentional, because it makes me trust you that I'm in good hands, because on every level you are being very thoughtful, and it's incredible world building, which I'm a huge fan of. So I really do approve. I think
thank you.
What do you think? So you can totally humor me. What do you think you are the best at? What's your strength as a writer?
I think that I like emotions and feelings a lot. It's like
I am so outnumbered here. Okay.
When I write a book, like, I want you to have like complete and full access to my main character's mind and what they're thinking, mainly because I am an overthinker. But I think that there's so much strength and vulnerability and in sensitivity and in feelings. And a lot of times I think those things get pushed aside in order to write a badass heroine or like a really strong character. But why can't you be strong and also emotional? Why can't you be competent and capable and also be an overthinker or have anxiety?
Or be vulnerable?
Why can't all of those things coexist? And the thing is that they can't. And so that's the kind of
Preach.
Like, I feel like I should just grab the mic and start pacing.
I think you should do a TED Talk about this. Yeah, I do.
Anyway, that is what I think my strength is as a writer.
I think it's going to segue into my next question about weaknesses, and I'm going to go ahead and go first. Mm-hmm. My absolute weakness as a writer is writing emotion. And Kristen saves me. Listen, Kristen saves me every single time because she's like, this is wonderful. I understand what your characters are doing in this scene. I have no idea what they're feeling. Mm-hmm. So I think this is a superhero power that I have never been able to.
I mean, that's amazing because I think the flip side of that, I know exactly what your characters are feeling, but what are they doing in this moment? They're feeling like that's what they're doing.
So what's your weakness? Like, what do you think is your... Like, what do you think is something that you'd love to be stronger in?
Plot, for sure. I remember my agent once read a book for me, and she was like, "So, nothing happens in this book," and I was like, "She experiences the full range of human emotion. Like, a lot happens in this book." Apparently that's not a plot. And so plot is not my strong suit. And so I rely very heavily on things like beat sheets and outlining because I know it's not a strength of mine.
So, you do outline? You
heavily. Yes.
Oh, I don't think we are team outliner.
Yes.
Oh, I didn't realize. I have a friend here. That makes me so happy. Okay. So you will take the time before you start drafting, you will map out. How detailed are we talking about?
So I have a very detailed beat sheet, which basically just guides me through the whole book of these are the major plot points that I need to happen in this story. Okay. And that gets very detailed. From there, I do a chapter outline, like a chapter by chapter outline, but that can just be a sentence. They fight in this chapter.
Oh, okay.
They kiss in this chapter. Whatever needs to happen in this chapter, it can just be a sentence, but I know where I'm going because drafting is my least favorite part of the process.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yes.
And everything I do leading up to the drafting process is in service of making it go faster.
Oh my gosh, I totally agree with you. I feel like if I have an outline, I'm not getting lost. If I'm not getting lost, I keep going forward. If I'm going forward, I'm reaching the finish line.
Yes. And I find the blank page so intimidating. And so that's why I outline, because I want to know where I'm going. The outline changes. Like there are chapters where I've written what happens and I don't follow it at all, but it makes me feel better having a sense of what needs to drive the story forward.
Yeah.
And so that is why I outline. I also do not reread anything when I draft. I don't edit as I go. I do not change a single thing. If there's a main character that starts in chapter 7, I'm don't like this character. I won't write them anymore.
You don't,
I don't edit as I go.
You don't feel like it's a little wrinkle that you need to smooth away?
No, because I think that the first draft, I'm telling myself the story. The first draft is for me to get to know it and to get to know my characters. In my mind, all a first draft has to do is exist. And once it exists, I can make it better and I can make it stronger. As soon as I go back and reread, I invite the internal editor to critique my work, and I'm not ready for that yet. And so I hold off and I get through the draft as quickly as possible, and then I edit after.
Such restraint.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm super impressed. How are you on the revision? Do you enjoy it, or do you
love revising?
Same.
Yeah, I think it's magical when you have a vision for a book in your head. In the first draft, you're like, yikes, did not get there. But with every revision, you do get closer. Mm-hmm. And that, seeing yourself get closer to the story you're wanting to tell, I find to be so rewarding.
I totally agree with you. It's like wiping a counter. It's done. One swipe. Oh, okay. It looks clean now.
Yes.
I feel like I can keep going. But I do struggle with, as I'm drafting, I do go back. It feels like a knot in the back of my mind. And I'm unable to unravel the rest of the narrative unless I loosen that knot and
Mhm.
smooth it away.
And I think that's what's cool about writing is that we all have different processes, and that what works for you
Totally.
is not the same thing that works for me, is not going to be the same thing that works for you. And books are all written with different processes. So
Yeah. And sometimes, even though I may have a process that I prefer, if I'm sitting down to draft a book and it's being particularly stubborn, I have to throw out my process.
Yeah. Yep.
And
Things change book to book.
totally.
Yeah.
So in Wild is the Witch, without spoilers, what was your favorite moment to write? Favorite scene?
Okay, so has anyone read Wild yet?
Here.
So because Wild was such a hard drafting process, because it was just like, it was the book 2 mess. I didn't feel like it was coming together. It was just a really hard process. And there was one scene where like I wrote it and I just had fun with it. And so our love interest, Pike, is cocky, he's arrogant, he for sure needs to be knocked down a peg. And he trips and falls and just face plants getting out of his tent one day.
Oh.
And I was cracking up at my desk writing this scene. The nature of witches doesn't really have any like funny moments. So I never had this experience as a writer where I'm like cracking up at my desk, envisioning this character just like face planting. And he wears matching pajamas. It's just like this ridiculous image. And I just loved it. And I was laughing and having fun with it. And I just thought, okay, it's coming together. Like it's going to be okay. And so like, that is why I'm attached to that scene.
Oh man, it is a really great scene. It also follows one of my favorite conversations in the book, which I can't talk about because it's spoilery. So you're just going to have to read it. I'm so sorry. Yeah, but I do really love that scene. And I did laugh out loud. So
Thank you.
You absolutely did it. So Pike is arrogant, needs to be taken down a peg. And Iris is, what's Iris like?
Iris is intentional, and she is an overthinker. She's private and she does not trust people easily, but she absolutely loves being a witch, and she loves magic, and she loves this power that she has.
Yes, and she's also very appreciative of nature, very respectful, in awe of nature.
Yes.
Has like that essence of, I want to stop in the woods and look at my surroundings, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So speaking about Pike and Iris, they're total opposites to me in a lot of ways. And I know that was intentional. So we're going to lead into one of my favorite things to talk about, which is kissing in books.
Yep.
So let's first, I want to know what your favorite trope is, romantic trope.
I love horse proximity, which is probably why that's why we have 2 people who are in the woods together, just the 2 of them.
And do they have their own tents in this story?
Do they?
I
don't know. Maybe a situation happens in which there's only one tent.
How terrible. There's only one tent to share.
That's a really, it's a very awful situation for them.
So what would you say the romantic trope is here?
I mean, there's definitely loath to love is the trope.
That is,
and it's funny because I love Loath to Love, and I love reading it, and I really fought against it.
Why?
Because I had this like idea in my head that I was like, this book, it's going to be moody and beautiful and lyrical and deeply atmospheric, and you can't possibly have banter and a moody, beautiful book. I don't know why I thought this, but I was like, for sure, the 2 things cannot exist.
They totally can.
Yes, as my editor pointed out to me. Because I was really fighting against their dynamic, because I felt like I wanted the book to have this really, really like moody atmospheric tone. And I just didn't feel like the banter fit in. And my editor was like, and she was like, the banter is one of the best parts of this book. And it doesn't, and she was like, and it takes nothing away from the setting.
Yes.
And so like, I think you should try and lean into it. And so I did, and that their dialogue ended up being the thing that came easiest to me.
You know, it's really interesting. I absolutely love a dialogue because I think so much of their personalities come through in their banter. And in their banter, you can see their conflict, which I always think creates the perfect kind of chemistry. What do you think is really satisfying about writing a Loath to Lovers type of story, especially with people who are opposites?
I think it's the moments when they're like, I think I've misjudged this person. I think it's those moments where they're small, they might not feel significant in terms of plot, but they really move things forward in terms of like that spark where you just think, I'm starting to see this person as something new, as someone I didn't think that they were. Like that's magic. Like the glance that lingers just a little bit longer than it's ever lingered before. The like, why are they being nice to me? What does this moment mean? I love that stuff. And so it was so fun to write in the context of this book.
Well, I loved it. And it's also kind of a slow burn. I don't know if
do you feel that way?
I do kind of feel that way, actually. You don't think so? Because I wanted them because
yeah,
well, for sure, but it takes them like especially Iris, I think, because she is a little bit more slower on the draw. She's a little bit more. She thinks she's a little more in her head.
Yes, I love a slow burn. As a reader, I love a slow burn. I don't feel like as a writer, I have the patience to pull it off. Like I am instantly, the instant they meet, I am like, I want you to kiss now. For sure. The instant they meet.
Yes. But they don't kiss instantly.
They don't, but like I get you to the
slow burn.
Listen, I get you to about the midpoint and I'm like, I can't take it anymore. There's only one tent.
So you were thinking, okay, so you were talking about this list of all the things that you love about a story and forced proximity, the lowest to lovers. What else is on this list? Do you think about as you're, I don't know, I know this is different for every writer, but do you think about themes at all as you're writing or on this list?
I actually don't. Like, I feel like, I think one of the coolest things about writing, sometimes I know what I want to write about. In the terms of Wild, I actually didn't know the themes of the book until I read it back. And I was like, oh, this is what I was exploring. This is what I needed to work through. And I didn't know that until after I wrote the book. And I think that that's a really cool thing about writing is that it's still, after years and years and years of being a writer, like constantly showing me the way I feel about the world and myself and situations.
I agree with you. When I am writing, if I were to hold a theme, this is the theme that I'm writing that I'm going to uphold with my words, it would feel a lot of pressure.
Yes.
I think.
And I definitely have ideas of like topics I'm exploring and things like that. But typically it's not until I've read the first draft that I realize, oh, this is actually the story I'm trying to tell.
Yeah.
And so my list, it's a list of vibes. That's what I would say. It's like Twilight vibes. The Twilight soundtrack. I never wrote that. Yeah, it's a fantastic soundtrack. It's things like in terms of this, I had not felt like I had written something super atmospheric. So I wanted to write something super atmospheric. Like on my list of things is a sister story. On my list of things is like an arranged marriage or a marriage of convenience. It's things that I love that I want to fit into stories.
Oh, I would be so here for a marriage of convenience.
Mm-hmm.
Sign me up.
Yes.
I love it. Okay, so then another little behind the scene question. Was there like a scene or a chapter, character, something that you had to cut that didn't make it into? Like what was something that you had to cut or trim?
This book, honestly, there wasn't much. Like I'm a very, very lean drafter. That's part of my process to get me through the first draft.
How lean are we talking?
This first draft was 54,000 words.
That is pretty lean.
So I didn't cut anything.
Yeah.
But that's what's cool about it is that because the first draft, I don't know my characters yet. I don't know anything yet. All of my revisions are basically about building upon what I've already put in like a very bare bones draft.
Yeah.
And so with revising, it's more about adding on, and certainly certain things get cut, but there was nothing big in this book that got cut. Like I actually kind of got the story down, more or less the story I wanted to tell in the first pass.
And you made it to the ending, and that's the ending that you wanted from the
Yes.
beginning. That never deviated.
Never deviated.
That's really cool.
Mhm.
You really are an outliner. I love it.
Yeah, but that was not the first book. Or nature. Like nature changed a lot. Obviously, it was glorified weathermen at first, so it changed a lot.
Do you think because you had less time, it really forced you? I mean, because nature changed so much. I wonder which process you've ended up enjoying more.
Well, I definitely didn't enjoy this process.
Yeah.
But it was nice. I did not get nature right on the first try or the second try or the third try or the fourth try. It was really the fifth try that I finally figured out the story I wanted to tell. With this book, I actually did know the story I wanted to tell.
Yeah.
In the first try. And then it was just about like making it readable and building upon it and deepening it and adding layers.
And I think you did it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You are so welcome. Okay, so my next favorite question is, what are you reading right now that you were loving?
So unfortunately it doesn't come out until April, but I'm reading this book I just finished this book called Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. It comes out in April. It is a historical fantasy. It is fantastic. There is a moment, and I'm not going to give it away. It is the midpoint of the book.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about.
It has like sat in my mind for like I finished this book weeks ago. I like think about it on replay. I read it over and over again. It was just one of those moments that launched itself inside me. So I'm very, very excited for that. Divine Rivals in April.
You guys are in for a treat. It's wonderful. And I know the moment that you're talking about because it literally took my breath away.
Yeah.
Literally took
It
my
was
breath away.
amazing.
So we have these two wonderful books. What can we hope for in the future? What's next?
Okay, so what's next? My publisher was like, maybe you should tease what's next. I have discovered I don't know how to tease anything.
Oh,
So I'm like, maybe I have a book coming out next year. Maybe it's fantasy. Maybe it's actually fantasy romance. Maybe it's super witchy. And maybe I'm going to announce it in 2 weeks. And I would really appreciate if you would act surprised because I just told you about it.
There's something else you could tell us about it?
It is.
Not to, I mean, you
No,
know.
it is my favorite thing I've ever written. It is the most magical thing I've ever written, and it is deeply, deeply romantic and very personal to me.
With some of your favorite things.
I love it. Like I'm getting like I love it.
Can't wait to read it.
And so, yeah, I can't wait to share it with
In
you
2
guys.
weeks.
If it were to be published, it would probably come out next year.
How about
Maybe-
that? I guess we. Oh
Maybe
man,
in a year.
I love it. Perfect. Well, I think we've got some time for questions. Perfect.
Oh, and what I wanted to say
Yes.
is I had a few extra like art prints of Iris and Pike and MacGuffin the Owl. And so if you ask a question, remember the number or like the order you ask your question in, and you'll be entered to win. And this goes, I also have one for anybody who's watching via Zoom or YouTube or whatever platform we are on. So, you know.
Yeah. So ask a question so that way you can potentially win one of these beauties. Perfect. Do we have any questions? I love it.
Can you name like one trope that this book features?
Great question.
Just like one trope.
One trope that let's see. Forbidden romance.
Yes. Yes. Sorry.
I see you. Go for it.
So I have read the book, and food plays a really surprising role in the book.
What does?
Food?
Food.
It does. Okay, the kind bars.
The
Yeah.
kind bars.
My question is, I make peanut butter jelly sandwiches quite often for myself. And when I make them, I do put chips in my peanut butter jelly.
Do you really?
Yes.
Really?
Yes, I have always, okay, so like
That's important. I don't care.
they add, so Pike is making sandwiches in this book and he adds chips to it. Because I always add chips to my sandwich because I think a lot of soft food together doesn't make sense.
Right.
And if you add chips to it, it creates textural complexity that I enjoy.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's inspired more questions. Yeah, so anyway, that is something I do. And that's why we're soulmates.
Yeah.
Because you do it too.
I knew people do. My husband does this. They add the chips in the sandwich.
Yeah.
I didn't hear that about peanut butter and jelly. I guess
They go on sandwiches.
Okay. Okay. All right.
So really detailed question about the writing process. What kind of chips?
I always go like regular, just like a kettle chip.
Oh.
For sure.
Yep.
I really want to
Yeah. You're number 4.
Yes.
What do you do when you're stuck?
What do I do when I'm stuck? That's a really good question. I think it depends on a lot of things. Like if I'm just not feeling inspired, a lot of times all I just need is like a little bit of distance from the project. So I like to go on walks when I'm stuck. I like to get outside and just kind of wander and see where my mind goes and see if I can untangle why I'm stuck. If that doesn't work, I also I rely really heavily on playlists and Pinterest boards to just kind of like inspire what I'm trying to do, like the mood and tone of the book I'm trying to write. So I'll listen to those, I'll go through my Pinterest board. And then if I've been stuck for a little bit, I will try and go back in my book and figure out where I got stuck and when the last time I felt not stuck was, and see if I can untangle it from there.
That's really good.
Also, sometimes the best thing you can do for writing is to just keep writing, even when you feel stuck. And sometimes that process will make it come unstuck.
I like it.
I've got a question from the online audience, which you guys have covered most of their questions so far, so well done.
Oh,
Thank you.
Live to serve.
You did a great job. So Liv Nicholas asked, how do you keep readers intrigued? How do you keep them involved in your story? And how do you keep people wanting to come back for more?
That's a great
That is
question.
a great question.
Have at it.
Oh, thank you, Isabel. I think for me, the thing I really do try and concentrate on is chapter endings. I typically try to end every chapter with like a question or some kind of tension or something that doesn't feel resolved that, you know, will make you want to keep reading, because a chapter is like a very natural endpoint. And so when I'm thinking about chapter endings, I really do try and end them in a way that propels you to keep reading. And I actually, when I read my books in the editing process, I actually write down when I reach for my phone. So I'm like, oh, I was clearly bored. And I want to know the moments in which like I actually tried to distract myself, because clearly they're not working. But I think like keeping questions alive, building tension, like layering the story and what's going on are like just big ways of keeping your readers engaged.
One of the best writing advice that I'd gotten early on was to think of each chapter as if it's its own little story, so that there is your main character, and then obviously your main character is working towards something, has a desire, a goal. And in that chapter, it could be something little. It's not every goal is going to be save the world. It could just be having a conversation with a tough neighbor or something. And then each chapter having like that rising tension, the rising conflict, and then at the end, not tying off that answer, to keep an obstacle going, and that there is a little cliffhanger at the end of each chapter to entice your reader to keep going.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
Oh, yes.
Number 6, your number 6.
So if you were to write a forced marriage trope, would it be witches?
Probably. It probably was.
Maybe it helps with ideas and how you would write it.
You know, I love witches, and I think that for the foreseeable future, I will be writing about witchy, magical women.
Very cool. We have 2 over here. Let's David.
You're number 7, David. Yeah.
Do you always work in the same place, or do you like around work in different areas?
No, I'm a creature of habit, and I always work in the same place. And I cannot work in coffee shops. I can't write on planes. Like, I am not productive anywhere outside of my own space. So I have my own office that I keep the door shut, and I like it quiet, and I like it clean, and it is like my space, and that's where I write. Isabel is chaotic and can write on her phone in bed. I don't know how she does it.
It's true. I have nothing to defend myself
The
with.
first time-
It's actually true.
The first time she was texting me, and she's like, I'm writing, oh, and I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, I'm writing on my phone in bed. And I'm like, you're what? I'm sorry, you're what?
trivia. I wrote Woven in Moonlight, 90% of Woven in Moonlight on my phone.
That's, it like blows my mind.
Yeah, I'm an eternal texter. You know, I'm an introvert, so that's why. We had a question back here.
So what should you do if you're lost in the woods and a cougar pops out?
Okay, so you make yourself big. The problem is that a cougar will see you as prey. So instead, you need to make yourself not look like prey. So you stand your ground, you throw your hands above your head, and you yell to try and assert dominance over the cougar.
Yes. No, but this is a true story. Wait, in our walk, there was a bunch of us. Yes. And yeah, I mean, there's something a little embarrassing. I'm not proud of it that happened on the walk, but she did tell me I was wearing this rain jacket. And she's like, Isabel, if you see a cougar, open up that rain jacket and make yourself enormous so that you can scare away the cougar. And I immediately felt better because
I do
there's
want to
something I
preface this that like I don't normally prepare my guests for a cougar encounter. Like that is not part of the protocol. It was that there was a sign in the woods that had noted a cougar sighting in recent weeks. And Isabel kind of zoned in on the sign and was like, what are we getting ourselves into? And so I was like, listen, we have a plan. You have a raincoat like this. We're going to be okay. Yeah.
I really was so concerned.
She really was. I did actually feel bad about it.
Katie.
I've got a question from a Shannon A. Do you have a CP that you work with? And if yes, how do you swap pages?
So I don't have like a traditional CP relationship. I'm actually deeply private about my first drafts of books. And I think a lot of it is because I don't know the story I'm trying to tell yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to figure it out for myself first before I invite someone else into the process. I definitely do have CPs that I've like swapped pages with as we're drafting to encourage each other to keep going. And we'll like basically do like a cheerlead read as the other is drafting, where we just point out the things that we love that is really working in the first draft. But because I do not invite any kind of critique into the first draft process, it's all like positive feedback. It's like, oh, I love this. This is really working for me. And I find that very motivating, but I do not invite any kind of like constructive critique until after the first draft is done.
I learned something new. I do the same thing with Becca.
Oh, do you?
Yeah. We chat every other day. We chapter swap, and it's a way to hold yourself accountable.
Yes.
And then when they're pointing out what is working, it makes me like, oh, okay, great. I'm heading in the
Yes.
right direction. But that's really all I need.
Yeah, that's the same with me.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's cool. Great. Any more questions? Yes. Okay. I saw this.
Are you number 7? David, what number were you?
8.
Okay, so
Oh.
you're 8.
Yeah.
She was
Oh.
Oh, okay.
8. Okay. 9.
9.
9. Mine too.
So I'm assuming your third book was on deadline also, and I was just wondering if it was easier for you after having done that. Was it your second or?
So funny story about this. I drafted, no, I wasn't on deadline yet. And I came up with this idea for my next book, and I drafted it thinking it was going to be my second book. And I like completely fell in love with it. And so I drafted it not on deadline, and it was actually the funnest drafting experience I've ever had. And I typically do not like drafting, so that's saying something. When I sent it to my editor, she didn't read it. She just like read the pitch and synopsis, and she absolutely loved it. But she was like, we would love something that's contemporary fantasy for your second book that would fit, like that would be more in the same vein of your first book. And so I put that book aside and then came up with an idea for my second book. And now I'm so glad I did, because I think that having 2 books in a similar vein really worked for like the first 2 books. And I'm so glad that that was her feedback. At the time though, I was like, but I wrote this whole book. But now it makes me feel extraordinarily ahead, which is very nice.
That's awesome. There was, yes, question. You're 10.
Okay, fine. So I heard earlier in the introduction that you are a little bit plant obsessed. I recently myself become plant obsessed. And I wanted to know if you had a favorite houseplant.
I do. My favorite houseplant is a Chinese evergreen. And the reason it is my favorite houseplant is because it was my first houseplant. And she is like alive and thriving. And so because of that, I feel a very strong affection for my Chinese evergreen.
It's a great question. Yeah. Mine, Fiona. I have a fiddle fig named Fiona, and she is
Yeah, she's
thriving.
beautiful.
And she's probably at 7 feet tall at this point. But I'm going to tell you this. I have killed succulents. I have murdered a cactus. And so really, I really expected this plant to perish within a week of getting her. And oh, Andrew's not paying attention. That's fine. Together, I'm talking about Fiona. Okay. Anyway, so she is just thriving, and I am really quite proud. She's alive. Yeah. Yes. 11.
What direction are your windows facing if you kept this building big?
You know, cardinal directions are not my strong suit. Andrew?
Well, she gets a lot of indirect light. So she's in a corner, so we have a north-facing window and an east-facing window. She's in the corner between those two, and so we can really talk about it later.
And so I have a 2 deaths policy in my house. Like I kill it once and it's a learning experience. If I kill it twice, I'm not allowed to buy it anymore.
Grow lights. Get yourself some grow lights. They help a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Get yourself a grow light for that corner.
Okay, yeah, I'm not that motivated yet.
I don't know if this is helpful, but I talked to Fiona. Yeah.
Not helpful.
Katie, we've got 2 more questions.
I've got time for 2 more questions.
Great.
I'm gonna do a combo questions because 2 people asked about food.
Oh.
One wants to know if you're a snacker when you're writing,
Mm-hmm.
and the other one wants to know what your favorite kind of tea is.
Okay. I absolutely do not snack when I'm writing. I feel that eating deserves its own special attention. And if I bring a snack to my desk, I completely ignore what is on my screen and I instead focus on my food. So I'm not a snacker. But I do always have a beverage with me. And my favorite tea during the day, I love like a second flush Darjeeling, which is like a very light black tea. I also love Ceylon, which is a light black tea. And then in the evening right now, I'm big on, it's called Post Alley Cappuccino. And it is a decaf, it's rooibos, so it's an herbal blend from Perennial Tea Room in Seattle. And I drink it every night.
Wow. Cool.
Yes.
I am a coffee drinker, so I will do an espresso with ice shaken and add oat milk.
Mm-hmm.
Ty had it this morning.
Yes, delicious. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I do love it. Perfect.
And so we have time for one more question.
Yes, literally one more question. Anyone? Virginia?
Yes. Oh, I do have a tea warmer. It is from Amazon, and it is
It's like the Ember
incredible- No, it's like this little brass circle with like an opening on top, and you set your teapot on top of it and light a tea light candle underneath, and
Oh,
it
I
keeps
love
your
that.
tea warm for hours.
That's awesome.
Yes.
Cool.
Did you have a question?
I'm not really to the point, but is it true that one of your party took off running?
Yeah, yes, that's a true story.
Isabel was okay.
How did you hear about? Who are you talking to? That's what I want to know.
In her defense, night was falling.
We were
The
in
sun-
pitch black. Someone
It
whispered it to you.
wasn't pitch black, but night was falling. The sun had gone down. There was a crack in the woods in the distance, and Isabel did react. But you know what? Like, that's a strong sense of survival.
It was like Pavlov. I heard like something and I just took off.
Whereas I'm just like, gorgeous, what kind of creature is coming to greet me?
I'm thinking-
And Isabel is like, I'm gonna save my life. I will see you back in the house.
Well, now that I've been thoroughly put in my place. Well, this was fun. Yeah. I'm so happy for you. Do your choice bestseller.
online audience.
Oh,
were
yes,
lovely.
thank you so
Yes, we
much.
appreciate it.